very quickly, I just wanted to highlight a change in schedule. We were invited to the parish feast for Resurrection Greek Church in Castro Valley. So next Tuesday, don't come here. Next Tuesday, go to the Greek Church, Resurrection Church in Castro Valley. It's on the syllabus, which you should both have. So, Resurrection Greek Church in Castro Valley. Go there next week at 6 for their patronal feast, and they have a lamb meal afterwards that is open to all. So, it's pretty good. I went last year, so come to that if you can.
All right.
And then just to note that dates should all be in there. So I've talked before about it. Should all be represented on our church calendar, the Google Calendar on the website, but maybe I've got a physical copy as well, including the dates when we're out of town, something like that. So, all right. So I've got just a quick few things to introduce here, and then we will walk around and I will point at stuff. I'll give you a little bit of the history of the different spaces in the church, and how you interact with those spaces, and if there's anything you have questions about, please ask. Usually I give about half the time-ish for me talking and half for your questions, but there's just a lot to get through, so it'll be pretty much the day. So ask questions as we go, please don't wait until the end. All right. So I think the first thing to be very clear about is that an Orthodox church is not a meeting hall, meaning it's not just a place that we get together and read scripture or something like that. We do that. We call that a book club, though, or a scripture study or something like that. This space, all of its constituent parts, is when we talk about a church, we mean a temple. And we use that word because we'll talk a little bit about this, but if you look at the back, I have two pictures on the handout. The one is, the top one is a layout of the Jewish temple, which you'll notice as we go through, there are some similarities, that is intentional. And then on the bottom is an idealized church cutaway, which obviously isn't what this looks like, at least not at the moment, but maybe someday. We can dream. And so though obviously the two spaces are not identical, in a very general sense, in both you see there is a place for people to stand, and in the back is the altar. In our case, we have a very large icon screen. You may remember though in the Holy of Holies it's described as there being a curtain that separates that from the rest of the temple space. Well, that's the curtain we have in the middle that separates our altar, our Holy of Holies, from the rest of the church. And therefore, this space then, not being a meeting hall, but being a temple, is a place where we properly worship God. And therefore, no matter which particular space you are in, we don't treat it like our home. We treat it like a temple of the Lord, where God dwells at all times. And so we are reverent, we are calm, we are quiet to a certain extent anyway, and specifically we are focused on God and on being in the temple. So you may notice that people don't bring food in here except for maybe little kids that need a snack or something, if they can't quite make it all through liturgy. You'll notice that people stand, that's our position of prayer. So no matter where they are, they stand reverently, calmly, still, worshiping. Because again, we're not here just to have a chat. We're not here to read something or hear a good sermon. We're here to worship God. All right. The other quick thing to note is that although everyone's best may look different, because we are here to worship God, we bring only our best, which is why you will notice that people here dress in nice clothes. Maybe not like tuxedos or something like that. Most people don't have that, but your nicest dress clothes. And additionally, we adorn the space with beautiful things, the best that we can, whether it's carpets or icons or the carving of the iconostas or the icon stands. We do everything we can to beautify this space because we want it to be a fitting dwelling place for God. It's not for us. This isn't what my home looks like, obviously. This isn't the aesthetic that I want for my house. But for a temple, for the place where God resides, we make it be the best we can. Oh, also including things like singing and investments and everything, right? Everything we do in this space, we try to be the best that we can manage in the moment anyway. Which is why maybe someday, by the grace of God, we will have a temple that looks more like the one in the back than this converted space. But there is still a beauty here. All right, so let's go on a little adventure. We'll go out. It's a little aggressive, but all right. So I start this handout with the narthex, which is this space. However, most appropriately, the church actually starts outside. If you ever go to some very ancient Athonite monasteries, you will see they have on their porch iconography. The iconography appropriate to the porch is Genesis. So if you ever get a chance to go to a beautiful ancient monastery, you will see the iconography of Genesis on the porch. When we come into the church, then we enter first the narthex. This is a converted space, and therefore our narthex is in a weird spot. If we look at the picture in the back, the narthex is the first little room there, and it should be in line. Like I said, that's just not the space we have, but we still try and treat this like a narthex, even though it's a less than ideal spot. This is where you will find Old Testament iconography. So if you look in here, we have the prophets, we have Noah's Ark, we have Jonah, we have the three youths. It's also a common space to have candles available for people to light, whether they're taking them into the church or lighting them in the narthex. And holy water is usually often available somewhere in the narthex. Yeah, we bless it once a year. Historically, this was a place where catechumens, or depending on the time frame that we're talking about, inquirers, people that were not Orthodox yet, would remain. Thus, only Orthodox Christians would be in the nave, which is the next part. There were different reasons for that, and we talked a little bit about that last time, going through the history of the church, but the biggest one being that at the beginning of the church there was a lot of persecution, and so there was a lot of distrust of people coming in, and therefore, in a trying not to get us all massacred by the state kind of way, we'll keep you all a little bit separated until you've fully come into the church and fully participated in all the very legal things we're doing here. Of course, as that relaxed with time, the restriction of having non-Orthodox inquirers, catechumens, whatnot out here was relaxed, and as you were all aware, we have no distinguishing element like that these days. Perfectly accepted in the main space for the whole time. The other people that might stand out here were Orthodox Christians that had been put under pretty severe penance, like, I don't know, you murdered someone, or you, whatever. You did something terrible. You would be allowed to be in the church, but for at least some period of time, you were expected to be working out whatever needs to be worked out and not participating in at least the Eucharist. And so you would remain out here, along with everyone else who's not Orthodox. All right, that's the narthex. The only other thing I'll say is that, so upon entering the narthex, you will often see people in a church that looks more like this, maybe doing three. In ours, where it's kind of off to the side, probably just one side of the cross. Upon entering and ultimately leaving, but again, when you first enter and when you last leave, you will note that that is a common thing in the way we handle many things. When you first enter or when you last leave, for example, with the blessing to clergy. First enter, last leave. Not every time you're in their presence. Make sense? You look confused.
Yeah, just
okay.
What do you do? You throw the cross?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. When you first enter and when you leave. Okay.
Last leave, yes. If you're running out of the car real quick, fine. Great. All right.
Solid.
All right, this next space then we're going to go in the middle for anyone who's joining online. Is the nave. Does that word ring a bell at all? Nave. Do you know what the root of that is? It's a good thought. Not though. It's a different English word that you know very well though. Nave. You will, if you read through the writings of saints, it's very common to refer to the ark of the church. Using ship or boat language is fairly common. Referencing, in a sense, that we are all in this together, that we all have a job to play, working together, and thus when one of us fails or falls in some way, it drags everyone down. And when one of us does a very good job, it drags everyone forward a little bit. Because again, we have this understanding of the community together, not just individual showing up to listen to someone yell at them for an hour or something, right? In modern day, of course, this is where everyone stands. As you come to services, I'm sure you've seen pretty much everybody's here, with the exception of maybe the kids will step out every now and then, or something store in the bathroom or something like that. But generally speaking, pretty much everything happens in here or at the altar. 90-some-odd% of what's happening in the church is in here. So the choir is, the vast majority of the iconography, etc. You will note we are lacking something that is very common in many Christian churches these days, and that is we don't have pews. Though there are certainly Orthodox churches that have pews here in North America, they are extremely uncommon outside of North America. And most of the Slavic churches in North America don't have them. So, we don't have them. Our position of prayer is standing, so we expect you to be standing as much as you are able. If you have a reason you have to sit, because the services are long and your legs are getting sore, or because you're old or little or injured or whatever, yes, we have seating. Please sit. Obviously, no one's going to give a sit to you for sitting. But the expectation is that as much as you are able to stand in prayer. Your own homes, as you're doing your prayers at home, that's in church together. The other very practical reason to not have pews is that our daily services generally have a number of prostrations in them, at least when we're in seasons which do such things. And those are very hard to do. You have a slab of wood right here from the next pew. So it just doesn't fit with the way that we do church. Also, another somewhat practical way, sitting just kind of allows you to relax and zone out and whatnot. We're really supposed to be engaged in worship. We're doing this together. You're all supposed to be engaged, even if you're not actively singing in the choir or serving in the altar or whatever. We're all supposed to be participating. That's why you'll see people all cross themselves together. We don't do it like randomly, but we do it together. We cross ourselves together. We venerate the icons at the end or middle of services together. We do all of these actions as a community, not as individuals. And that's just way easier when you don't have pews. All right. To talk a little bit about this particular nave. So it is very common, when entering a nave, again, for the very first time, you will see people cross themselves 3 times. Again, if the church looks like this, they may do that at the beginning, the entry of the narthex, they may do it at the entry of the nave. In this space here, as far as I'm aware, pretty much everyone does it when entering the actual nave, not so much the narthex. And then again, the very last time in the beginning. You will see people cross themselves when they cross the middle point. You'll see when we open the altar that, of course, the table is in the middle, but more importantly, in some ways, the high place is at the front. The only person looking back at the church is Christ, and so we bow to him when we cross the middle point. So single cross and small bow when you go over the middle line of the church. Of course, we have lots of icons everywhere. In the middle here, we pretty much always have the icon of the feast or saint, or if there is no major feast or saint, which we'll do outside of the possible period, I'll take some of the icons that look like the ones in the back corner. I'll have you go look in a minute at all of the icons. But those show the saints for every day of each month. So that icon will be in the middle. That's the first icon you venerate when you come in. And then we go to Christ's side. So you'll see people, they go to the middle, they venerate Christ, and whatever other icons going down that way. And then they come back around, they venerate the Theotokos, and whatever other icons are on her side. And that, again, just to be very explicit, cross yourself twice and bow, kiss, preferably feet. If there are no feet, then hands. If there's no hands, then hair. To my knowledge, there's no icon that is lacking both feet, hands, and hair, so you should be good. These are not family members of yours, so you don't kiss them on the lips, right? That's what you do for a significant other or whatever. Not for beloved, but non-family members, right? And we're being respectful and honoring them and kissing them and feet. And generally just once, and then a final cross afterwards. So you'll see people that come in, they're middle, they're Christ, they're icons, they're those icons on that side. And then from there, people may go to, if their particular patron saint is somewhere, they may go venerate that icon, or they may just go stand wherever they like to stand for the remainder of the service. We have our icons on the walls. So we'll talk about the iconostas in a moment when we get there. So I'm intentionally ignoring that. So don't worry. We have at the very top, going most of the way around the church, we have hopefully recognizable scenes. They're all biblical. And they're all labeled, although the font is maybe a little bit hard to read sometimes, but entrance into Jerusalem, or calling of Zacchaeus, or Christ walking on water, all these different images hopefully recognizable. Then we have several different icons of the Theotokos. In the center back, we have all of our North American saints. If you're not familiar with them, in just a second I'll have you take a few minutes to go around and look at them. Please take a look at the North American saints. There's a good number. We add to them regularly, so good people to get to know. Those three behind the monitor there are in the back behind the choir. Those are all saints associated with writing hymns or being choral in some way, shape, or form, hymnographers, etc. I already talked about the of the month ones. And then these are the collection of the saints for the founding members of this parish. So that's what those all are. In addition to Christ or the feast or whatever we have in the middle, Christ and Theotokos, on the side we have St. Herman, we have St. Nicholas, as in jolly old St. Nicholas, that guy, and then St. Sebastian of San Francisco Jackson. So two North American saints. You'll notice the last thing I will say before I tell you to look around, if you see an icon that has a little circle in one of the corners, within that circle is a relic of the saint. So people will kiss that instead of hands or feet or anything else. All right, I will now give you a few minutes, not too crazy long, but I want you to just go around and look at all the icons a little bit. You're welcome to look at the top, but like I said in the Iconostas, like I said, we'll discuss it more in more detail in just a minute. But look around, and if you've got any questions about anything we've talked about so far, or the icons, please ask.
I want to make sure I have it right. So when you're walking in, you throw a cross. When you're walking into the nave, you do 3 crosses.
Mm-hmm.
Then you come up towards the center.
Mm-hmm.
You do 2 crosses. You prostrate, and then you
No prostration.
No prostration.
Yeah.
Okay, you will do 2 crosses, and then you will kiss the feet. If not the feet, then the hands. If not the hands, then the hair.
Mm-hmm.
And then you will go to the right.
So you're doing 3. You do 2, kiss, 1 for crosses, cross and bow. That makes sense? So come up to the icon and do 2. 1, 2, kiss the feet for Christ.
Oh.
Fine. So 3 total.
Oh, okay. But you're doing it twice. So you're doing 6 crosses in total, right?
No.
Yeah, okay.
2, kiss, 1.
Oh,
3
okay.
total. For each icon.
Got you. For each icon.
Yep.
Okay, for sure. All right, that's that.
If there's multiple people, it is certainly appropriate to kiss her with a halo because she's Saint Fourteen. So I can't explain that one.
Gotcha.
She should have a halo.
Do you have to kiss both icons?
They're different icons, so.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have to? No. You don't have to, but I'm telling you what the normative practice is here.
Gotcha.
What you will see people do and what I expect you would probably do. I guess that maybe I should just say this somewhat explicitly, but your job here is to do what other people do right now, to be a sponge, so to speak. So I said this in the 2-1 class Friday last week. Ignore everything you've read online for right now, please, and just participate the way you see other people participating here. I talked a little bit about this as well, but just to reiterate, all the things I said before about doing things together as a community, but in addition, people here are trying to pray together, and it's distracting if someone is doing other things, which of course, to a certain extent, we expect. My little kids, of course, are distracting, and you just have to deal with that. And all the kids as well. So there's a certain understanding that comes with visitors that don't really know what they're doing. It's fine, but if you are planning to be here long term, then your goal right now should be to blend in, so to speak. So don't feel awkward if people do something and you kind of like, whoa, what? You'll remember next time. Try your best to be sort of mimicking what you see everyone else doing. Yeah. All right. Take a look around, especially the North American saints.
I wasn't actually aware to that. I guess Mother Dara actually did that one too.
Yeah, and she did another one. Is it the same Christian one in the front too? I'm pretty sure there's 2 here that she did. Yeah.
So it would be not one of these two.
No, it's not.
Apprentices.
No, I actually don't know this word of those.
Yeah.
Someone told me the other day, but I actually since forgotten. It isn't even the monster neither.
Yeah, that would be really hard to find. I think I saw it.
I've seen it in a few churches.
Yeah, I've seen churches, but it's really hard online to find this. Mhm.
I will note a little bit as you explore that in a church that looks like the bottom here, you might expect there to be iconography painted directly onto the walls. So, and there are some churches around here that are able to do that. In a converted space, it's harder to do that. This is a historical building, so we're limited a little bit of what we can do, but hanging icons is a pretty common thing to do in place of painting them directly onto the walls. Yeah, okay, sorry, I said I was going to talk about those briefly, but no, you're fine. Those are every month, so you'll notice at the top it'll say July, and then it'll go through, and so we've got many saints we commemorate every day of the year. We can't fit all of them onto that icon, but we try and fit at least the most prominent. So if we don't have a dedicated icon of someone, then we'll bring out one of those. If you're not familiar with lives of North American saints, they all have pretty well recorded. Their life is pretty well recorded, so I highly recommend reading through some of them. Especially with like much older saints, the most recently canonized saint. So just to talk a little bit more about icons here while you look around. Icons serve a number of purposes. One, I just mentioned my little children, they don't know how to read. So if we just handed them service books, it would be rather pointless, right? Not really able to follow along very well. But icons are a good way, especially some of the scenes, like we have the biblical scenes at the top, a good way for those that are unable to read, either because of being small or maybe because of a language barrier. When I traveled abroad to other Orthodox still appreciate all the icons on the wall and pray in the presence of all these things. So they serve that purpose. They are supposed to be catechetical, educational in nature, so they teach you about some of the people or the events that are depicted in them. Oftentimes when they depict people, will show, not always, sometimes it's just a figure, but sometimes they'll also show in the background important scenes from their life or something like that, so they can give you some context for the person. St. John there, for example, shows the cathedrals in San Francisco and Shanghai is attributed as. So that's why those two are there. Homage to Olgos and Alaska, so that particular icon has the Northern Lights behind her. There's a rather complex language to iconography, which we certainly don't have time to go into now, but if you're curious, there are some people here that know more, so I can direct you to them if you are curious. Icons also serve to remind even those of us that can read that we aren't doing our services alone, even if it was just me here. We are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and it's pretty common, again, parish dependent obviously, but pretty common to, for example, show pictures of angels serving in the altar. A reminder that it's not just those of us standing around the altar, but all of the heavenly powers are serving with us together in our liturgy. Also, again, on a somewhat more practical level, some of these people lived a really long time ago, and it's hard to connect with someone that lived 1,000 years ago. We're very physical beings. Icons are a good way to depict people. If you look back, sometimes people ask me, like, well, how do we know that this is what the person actually looked like? You can look at old icons of these people and see that the images remain largely the same through time, remarkably consistent, even for images of Christ. Obviously, there's cultural shifts from one place to another and the way iconography is done and whatnot, but you will find icons of Christ, at least in our tradition, are very consistent. Also, just to mention, because people always ask, the difference or why what we are doing is not worship. Worship, of course, is reserved for God alone, so no one is worshiping the icons. However, we believe that we are all made, as it says in Genesis, in the image and likeness of God. And the saints, then, are those that have most appropriately lived that out in their life. The ones that have dedicated themselves the most to being an image of Christ, to letting His light shine through them. And so, the icons then allow us to worship God through His saints, through the people that have done His will, by showing veneration and respect to those people that have done His work well. We are honoring Him. And if you want to be a little more technical on the theology, you'll find in some of the writings of saints coming out of the Seventh Ecumenical Council an understanding of icons as a sort of window into heaven. So we understand that by bringing these icons into our space, we're bringing the people into our space as well. And like I said before, worshiping together with everyone here. All right. The last thing that I want to call out, because this is sometimes confused, in English we use the word saint, but in nearly every other language the word is just holy. There is no difference between this thing or person being holy and saint. So if you look at some of our icons that are not written in English, but that have either Slavonic or Greek text, you will see in Greek, if you learn to read it, it will say agios, just the word for holy, or in Slavonic, it will say sviat, again, just the word for holy. It's not a separate word for the person. So sometimes we will we'll say Holy Prophet Elias, for example. We're not saying that he's not a saint, just using the other word in English. All right. The other thing, of course, is the choir. You may have noticed, if you were remotely observant, that we do not use instruments in our services. We use, so to speak, the one perfect instrument that God made, which is our voices. We mix all people, as long as you are Orthodox anyway, men, women, young, old. It's a little microcosm of the church. and they sing on everyone's behalf. But you will also notice that there are times, especially for example the Creed or the Lord's Prayer, where pretty much everyone joins in. It's never wrong, but as I mentioned before, with not being distracting with your practice, same is true for singing. Sing along quietly, to yourself, so to speak, but not in a way that the person next to you is going to be disturbed by your singing. Especially because I don't know how good or bad your singing voices are, but sometimes we think we're better singers than we are, and it can be pretty distracting. So, by all means, don't feel like you have to keep your mouth shut the entire service, but if you feel so inclined to join the choir once you have been made a catechumen, then I can bless that if you were a singer. Otherwise, just participate in what you are. The singing itself is very educational as well. If you pay attention to what I sing during the services here or on Sundays with the full choir, you'll notice that a lot of the hymns, sometimes it's just psalms. We'll talk more about some of the structure of our services later, but other times it's hymns that are very particular to the day or the saint or feast. And they'll just very clearly lay out why this is an important feast, how it relates to our lives, what it is we're remembering. Sometimes for saints, it'll go through various important events in their life. It teaches you about the feast, about the saint, which is why I very often recommend people to go read the hymns of the church. You don't have to sing it, you can just read it on your own, but it's educational. It'll teach you a lot. If you can get good at coming to church and just paying attention to what the choir is saying, you'll learn a lot. It's very helpful. All right, let's move on to the front, and we'll talk about the iconostas and then into the altar. So, sometimes people ask me why we have the altar blocked off. We do not have the iconostas here as a blockade, except in the very practical sense of with little children running around. My own kids, as a prime example, they get comfortable in the space, but they have no purpose to be in there. There's no reason that they need to be in the altar, so they shouldn't go in the altar. And this serves as a way to basically keep people out that don't need to be in. But what it is not doing, it is not blocking your view of the service. What it is actually designed to do is to focus your attention on the parts of the service that matter the most. So we'll talk about this in a few minutes here, but you may notice, if you've been to liturgies on Sundays, that there's a good number of other people, acolytes or altar servers, that are assisting in making sure the liturgy can happen smoothly, that I have the censer when I need it, or the candles are ready to go for the upcoming entrance or something like that. That's not the important part of the service, though. It's not really useful to everyone out here to see the person putting, incense on the censer, or lighting the candle on the sign to get ready, or directing people, making sure they know where to go, etc. Right? That is a necessary practical part of making sure the liturgy can run, but that's not why anyone came here. And so having a thing here helps focus on what is actually important, which is the thing happening on the altar, the liturgy itself, the sacrifice that's happening in the second half of liturgy, for example, as we're preparing for the Eucharist. And there are times when we close the curtain and the doors. Generally speaking, the doors stay closed unless we are going through them. So pay attention, you'll notice that unless I'm going to come in or out through the doors, they're closed. There's just no reason for them to be open. The curtain is usually open during our services, but there's a few times in liturgy when it closes. And in a very practical sense, they close when the clergy have things to shuffle around and do that are not the most important thing in the moment. So, for example, there's a few times where the clergy are supposed to greet each other with whatever festal greeting for that day. That's not an important thing that everyone needs to see. It's just part of the liturgical actions we do at that moment as we prepare for the next part of the liturgy. And so we close the curtain. It's also closed immediately before communion comes out. Again, on the very practical level, the clergy are receiving communion at that point in time, whereas everyone out here should be themselves preparing to receive communion in just a few minutes. And so watching people shuffle around back there really is not the most important thing. You really should be doing whatever last, final preparations you need to do before coming forward to receive communion. It's just not helpful to, watch us do our thing back there. However, on a slightly more theological level, spiritual level, when we open the curtain then to bring the chalice out, you may recall that on the cross, when Christ dies, what happens to the curtain in the temple? Remember? It's torn in two. It is an image of Christ, God, now being with the people. And so as we get to that point in the liturgy, as the clergy have communed, the curtain is thrown open, the doors are opened, and Christ, his body and blood and the chalice, come down to be with the people. And he is then received. Again, that's communion that we all partake of. So there's a theological explanation as well as the practical. You will see in nearly every Orthodox church, maybe I shouldn't even say nearly, every Orthodox church will have Christ on what is our right looking at this, and the Theotokos, his mother, on the left. Beyond that, it kind of depends on how wide the iconostas is and which local culture you are talking about. The doors that go into the church are usually either the archangels, like we have here, or the deacons. We used to have the deacons on the door, and then when we got a more permanent iconostas, they decided to switch them to be the archangels. That's not necessarily universal, but it's pretty universal. Somewhere on the iconostas, usually then, will be St. John the Forerunner. We don't usually call him the Baptist. We usually call him the Forerunner. And the patron of the temple, so in this case, St. Christine of Tyre. It's also not uncommon to have an icon of the saints of whatever land you're in. Ours isn't wide enough for that. Sometimes you will see there's an icon of other particularly well-loved saints. Sometimes you may even see an icon of the person who donated most of the money for the iconostas somewhere on there, usually for wider one. Wouldn't have any space to do that here, but so it can vary wildly which particular icons are on beyond Christ and the Theotokos, but there's a kind of general template for you. Above, it can also vary, but again, to my knowledge, it's pretty darn universal to have the mystical supper or Last Supper right above the doors. Obviously, that's what we're doing in liturgy. It's fairly common to have either the icons of the great feasts, which is what we have, or the icons of the disciples or apostles up there. In some churches, they have very, very tall iconostases, and so they may have other rows of icons. There's technically rules about what can go where, but it's not that important for right now. And like I said, if you've got really wide ones, then of course you fill it in with more. But that's what we have here, and that's why they're there. The last thing to call out, so the thing hanging up over the icon, that's the priest's stole, basically. We have a fancy Greek word we use for it, but it's a stole, that's what it is. This particular church does a lot of services through the week, and not necessarily ones where I'm serving in the altar, and so if someone wants to confession, it's just easier to grab it. So that's why that's there. Questions about anything so far? All right, let me just make sure I didn't miss anything, but I think that's most of it. All right, sure. All right, let's do the last part. So please come up. Just don't go in. I'll open the curtain here. Usually the curtain will only be open for services, but for the purposes of this, I won't open the doors, but peek in a little bit. Whatever works, you can open the other door too if that's easier. All right, so you saw when I entered here the prostrations. We'll also notice that I said earlier that unless you have a reason to be in here, don't come in here. That is true. You'll see that unless people are going to serve in the altar, even people that have questions, they'll come to the side, but they don't enter. There is no, unless you have a very specific reason to be in here, we don't enter this space. And again, unless you're Orthodox, so no catechism requires, also occupy this space, generally speaking. We use the word altar a little bit loosely to refer to this entire space and also the main table in the middle. Properly speaking, this is not a sacrificial altar. Does that make sense? It is fairly common in other Christian groups, at least to my knowledge, to think of the altar in the middle as sort of like a pagan sacrificial altar or whatever. If you look at the back of your handout, you'll notice that there is an altar that is kind of out, and that there's then the Holy of Holies in the back, and that those are in different places. Do either of you know what was in the Holy of Holies? The Ark of the Covenant, yes. Which is what? What was its purpose in there? Do you know?
Not exactly.
It's the throne of God. So when the high priest would go in once a year, the presence of the Lord would come and rest on the Ark of the Covenant, and he'd have a rope tied around him so they could pull him out in case he died. Of course, we come into the altar much more frequently, but that's because God has now come to be with us, and so we have more reason to be. This altar, then, is the throne, not the sacrificial altar, which is the outside altar in here. That is where the blood sacrifices would happen in the altar, or in the temple. That altar is the little table on the other side, called the table of oblation, or sometimes, to use a fancy foreign word, prothesis. That table is where we do the small service called proskunidi before liturgy, where we actually prepare the bread and the wine to be the body and blood of Christ. It's done over there. And then in the liturgy, we do the great entrance where we take it up from that table, recess it around, and put it onto the altar in the middle. All right. Do you happen to remember what was in the Ark of the Covenant?
No.
All right. The tablets of the law. So we have the gospel, which is a new representation. There was the manna which fell from heaven inside this tabernacle. We have the reserved sacrament. I talked about this in one of my homilies a little while ago, but the Orthodox Church always has reserved sacrament in the church. So if you're at all familiar with understandings in other churches of Eucharistic adoration and there being a light lit somewhere in the church to represent when it is present, that doesn't really make any sense for us because there's always some in the church. We keep it here so that if someone gets sick, I can take communion to them. If they're dying, if they're, whatever, majorly injured, I can take communion to them, regardless of whether we've done liturgy that day. If it's the middle of the night or something, right? I'm going to come here, get the thing, and go to them. So we always have reserve in there. And then the last thing is Aaron's rod that budded, and that for us is the cross. We sing in the hymns for the cross and some of the feasts of the cross that the cross buds forth for us life everlasting. So we keep that the same things. In this particular time of year, we have this other cloth on top with an icon of Christ. This was in the tomb during Holy Week and is now brought in here for now. It will be removed at the end of Hospitality when we get out of the season if possible. So that's not usually there. It's only the 40 days of Hospitality that it's on the altar. You'll also see we have a collection of icons on the altar. People will bring me icons to bless. I put them on the altar for between one liturgy and 40 days, depending on how long you want them there. So those are people's icons they have brought for me to bless. They'll remain there until I take them off and do a final blessing on them and then return them to people. So, and then we always have a light. That lamp is always on, and that represents the light of Christ. So we try at least never let that go out. That will always be lit. All right, talking a little bit about some of the other things. we have on the east wall, because our churches should properly face east. This is convert space, it doesn't, but if we ever make this church down here, it will. The high place, then, I mentioned before, is the only face that you will see staring directly back at you during liturgy. That is why our celebrants don't face the people, but face with the people. Because ultimately speaking, I'm in need of Christ's salvation just like everyone else. I have been ordained, I have been set aside to serve a particular role in the life of this parish, but I'm still human. The only one who is God is Jesus. He is the only one that looks directly back at the people for the entirety of the service, and like I said before, the icon on the high place is what you're bowing to when you cross the middle of the church. If we were in a church like this, above him would be an icon of the Theotokos, which would be the second highest icon in the church. The highest would be in the dome, which would be Christ, the Pantocrator looking down at blessing everyone. That's not the space we have, it's a smaller icon. It's common for iconography in here to include clergy, so we have the 4 hierarchs on either side that wrote the liturgies that we use. We'll talk about these later, but St. James wrote the earliest liturgy, and then St. Basil and St. John refined it. St. Gregory's liturgy is the one we use during Lent, weekdays in Lent. Those are all the liturgies we use most regularly. It's also not uncommon to have imagery, iconography about communion, so you'll see the 2 on top here, receiving the body and receiving the blood in kind. And then we've got the things that we process with, the cross and the fans. So again, something people ask me sometimes. The fans are not for me when we do processions. It's for the gospel. I'm interchangeable. The gospel is not. The fans are for the gospel. We fan the holy things, in this case the gospel. And then the cross, which hopefully means controversial. I think the last thing is the 7-branch candle stand. That's taken from Judaism. As is probably a number of things that you may have noticed now. So the last thing I want to say then is, if this feels like I'm harkening back to Judaism a lot, it's because we are. Our understanding is that we are not some other thing. We are the continuation of that. And so this is the temple as much as it is a temple. Everything that was the temple in Jerusalem, this structure is, in its entirety. We don't do blood sacrifices anymore because we had the most perfect of all blood sacrifices, which was Jesus. But we still do his, as you see in the image right above the doors, there, the mystical supper. We still do a sacrifice here, it's just his sacrifice. We use incense. The censer and everything is through the entryway there. The incense offerings are a very normal and common part of Jewish practice. We use incense in all of our services. We have vestments just like Judaism in different vestments, right? So we are the continuation of that. Everything we do is tied to that in some way, shape, or form, with a handful of minor exceptions. Either a continuing of the evolution of that thing or just exactly the same. So you will notice, I believe next week, the topic is just showing all of the direct links to Judaism, but we've already seen a good amount of that. I want you to remember that for next week, because I will harken back to some of these things next week. Week after next, because next week you're going to the church for their feast and land dinner, but the week after that, we'll talk about the connection to the Jewish faith and remember all these things. All right, questions about this space? Easy crowd. Actually, there's one more thing. I don't know if you can see, there's chairs in the back. It might be a little more difficult for you, but you can see there's chairs in the back. That is the bishop's throne. So when the bishop is here, he sits in the middle, and he's the only one who sits in the middle. So you'll notice that when Father George or I go up to the high place or something, we stand to the side, never directly in the middle. Only the bishop gets to do that, because he properly is the icon of Christ in the church. So he gets to sit in the middle. believe that is the end of the handout. I don't have much more. How are we doing for time?
7:21.
7:21. Wow. We didn't have a lot of questions, so I guess that's great. Well, I will turn it over then if there are any questions about anything else. I believe I've covered everything that I wanted to cover for the day. So, if you have questions of things you've read, things you've seen, things you've heard, things that I didn't address in the tour, anything like that, please ask away.
So, how does one, get the position of saint? Like, how does one become? Is it who gives that?
It's a good question. The church as a whole. So, when there is a candidate, so to speak, they are a candidate because people on the ground are already treating them as a saint. They may already have icons painted of them. They may already have hymnography written for them. People are already venerating them like a saint. And then the church, so to speak, acknowledges that and either gives a stamp of approval and gives an official feast day for them, and if there isn't a complete service written to them yet, we'll flesh that out. I guess if something were to come up to indicate not, then that would be dealt with that too. The process there is a switch. So the night before we do the last set of prayers praying for that person's salvation. And the next day we switch over to asking them to pray for us. And that is then when we have considered someone canonized. If you ever see an icon that is just a picture of someone but with no halo, that is probably someone that is being venerated as a saint but has not been officially canonized yet. The other thing to note is because, I don't know how techie you are, but if you're familiar at all with the term federation, is a loose connection of affiliated but non-overlapping governance. Does that make sense? Maybe? Yes, no? Okay. So all of the Orthodox churches are in communion with one another, but no one is in charge of the other. Our head is Christ. We don't have a pope that sits at the top and manages everything from there. So the church in Russia is equivalent to the church in North America, or equivalent to the church in Constantinople, or the church in Antioch, or the church in Jerusalem, right? They are all equals. So whenever any one of those churches canonizes a saint, they are considered a saint in the entire church. However, that said, because of that, it's often uncommon for veneration of a local saint to be well known outside of there unless they were very well known, very popular. So for example, everyone knows St. Patrick. St. Patrick was a pre-schism saint, so he's one of ours. There are St. Patrick Orthodox churches, but he was not venerated at all in Slavic Orthodoxy, at least, until basically the modern day. Not because he wasn't a saint, but because they just didn't know who he was. They had no connection to him. They had no reason to know who he was. He did his work over there. He did wonderful work, saintly work, but nothing related to the Slavic lands. So they had no reason to care about his canonization, so to speak. Again, not that he wasn't a saint, just not their saint, so to speak. If that makes sense. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Yeah.
So does the whole Bible fall? Is it like a straight line, like a canon timeline, or is it like each book in the Bible is like possibly from a different time?
Sure. Is the Bible a history textbook is kind of the question. No, not at all. It does not serve that purpose. neither the Old nor the New Testament was written to be a historical record of all the things that have happened in their historically ordered timeline. One very good example of this, if you read St. John Chrysostom, I like to use him because he's a very prolific writer. We call him the Golden Mouth. He talks a lot about Genesis, and he is pretty clear in his interpretation of Genesis. He calls out in one of his homilies, how can it be that God, who has not yet been incarnate, walks with Adam and Eve? On what legs does he walk? On what feet does he walk with them? His argument then, of course, is to imply that we can't really take that literally. God was with them, absolutely, but walking with them, not so much. And so our understanding then, that is the predominant understanding of the gospel in the Orthodox Church today, at least, of the Bible. Which is to say that it's all true, but it's not necessarily historically perfectly accurate. That's not its purpose. It is not trying to accurately record this happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and whatever. But it is all true, meaning that it is all accurately describing our relationship to God. The general saving work that Christ did, that is all accurate, that is all true. But it is not historically this. The very earliest church, which we'll talk a little bit about next week as well, did not have the New Testament because it hadn't been written yet. Jesus was doing his thing, and everyone knew that, and so when he died and ascended and everything, and sent his disciples and apostles out unto the ends of the earth to go preach and baptize all nations, they did that. But never anywhere does it say, and take this book, or and write a book and take it. So when they went to person, they just taught what they had been taught, in the way they had been taught. And it wasn't until somewhat through their ministries that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John decided that maybe it would be important to actually write some of this down. It makes it a little bit easier to share with people. But the very first liturgies were done without a New Testament. When they talk, in Acts or whatever, when Paul talks about Scripture, he's talking about the Old Testament, not the New, because it hadn't been written yet. So we very much have an understanding that Scripture supports the church. Scripture supports our faith, but it is not our faith, nor is it our church. It is very central, but ultimately Christ is the center of our faith and of our church. And the Bible is, so to speak, the next ring outside of that. It is very important to us. You saw the gospel on the altar is, got metal and iconography all over it. And we put fans over it when we do processions and whatnot. We treat it very respectfully. It's very important for us. But ultimately speaking, it is representative of our tradition. It is not our tradition. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Another good question.
So
Yeah.
with that, what was the name of the saint? The Golden Mouth?
St. John Chrysostom. Chrysostom literally means golden mouth in Greek. St. John Chrysostom.
What was his recommendation or your recommendation on how to go about reading the Bible?
I recommend reading him. His homilies are very approachable. He was writing for a general church, he was not writing. He was preaching for a general church audience, and it was recorded what he was preaching on. And so it's not like complex and deep and challenging theology to wade through. It's designed to be very approachable and very understandable. So again, I highly recommend just reading them yourself. They're available online for free, so find them. But just to very briefly answer the question of how does he recommend to understand Scripture, pretty much what I said before, that when for example, it says in Genesis that God was walking with Adam and Eve, we're to understand that God was with Adam and Eve, that they were not alone, apart from God in the Garden of Eden, but not that he was physically walking with them, because Christ hadn't been incarnate yet. He had no physical body to walk with them. So he was with them, but we use terminology that is more understandable to people at the time. Make sense?
This is just kind of more advice that I'm asking a Jew, and I felt like they were trying to insist that because Jesus was born Jewish, that they are just as equivalent to God as Jesus is the Lord. And it infuriated me, and it was, since it was online, I just swiped away. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I kind of put myself in that man's shoes. And he kind of turned the other cheek, but I think I would get angry enough to start a fight over that. And I don't know if you have any advice for like managing that kind of anger, or if that response is an appropriate response. I really don't. I just would like to know what you could tell me about
How to respond to non-Orthodox, sometimes Christian people talking about the faith. So a few things to remember. Our understanding in Orthodoxy is that the world out there is not Orthodox. Not even really a little bit. Even other Christian groups sometimes get close. Sometimes they're pretty far. And so our approach then when dealing with other people is effectively compassion and understanding that these people aren't speaking as someone with the full knowledge. These aren't like, if you are at all familiar with church history, someone like Arius, who was a priest and really should have known better. Someone who was educated, at least you'd hope, and in charge of a parish, and yet ends up going kind of off the deep end with his theology, such that the entire church has to, for several hundred years, try and remind everyone that no, that guy was kind of weird. But most people out there aren't him.
Yeah.
If they've had any connection with the church, maybe it's through less than enduring headlines, for example. Maybe it was a poor personal experience in some Christian connected community in some way, shape, or form. And so oftentimes these people are speaking of their understanding of Christianity, in some cases Orthodoxy. But what they're not really doing is speaking from any actual position of knowledge. And so, of course, part of you wants to get upset and to defend, but the thing to remember is that just the way people work, if you come swinging at someone, it's just going to cause them to become more entrenched. Really, the best way to deal with someone who is in one way, shape, or form really swinging and missing in terms of our theology is to just treat them like everyone else. Love them like Christ would, and show them, rather than telling them that their theology is wrong. Show them by living a life that is, that shows honor towards God's love, that actually follows the gospel message. And that will be what converts people, not your defense of their off-the-wall idea on this or that. And it can be hard, because people can be very, very pushy about this or that, especially if they're really trying to needle in and cause you to try and convert to whatever they're preaching. But you have to understand, again, that it's, for example, one of the things that I try very hard to do in my classes here, you'll notice, is I try very hard to not be specific about, well, this is taught here and our response is that, right? Because ultimately speaking, I haven't been any of those things. I can't really definitively state what those people teach, but I can say what Orthodoxy is. So I will tell you what Orthodoxy is, and that is what I will preach all day long. That's what you should do too. Again, in terms of like online interactions, chances are good your comments mean literally nothing. I don't know, I've never heard of anyone that's converted because of reading some particularly inspiring internet comment. I don't know, maybe there exists someone out there, but it seems unlikely to me. Most people, and in fact I think pretty much everyone I've ever met that converts to Orthodoxy or Christianity does so because someone led them to Christ and they were convinced by that. That personal relationship, that personal interaction is far more compelling than anything you can hit them upside the head with online or in person for that matter.
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Turn the other cheek is the other biblical response I can give you. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Could you provide maybe a definition of orthodoxy?
That is a very. What is orthodoxy? The word itself means right practice, right belief. So when we talk about being Orthodox, we mean being in the church, baptized, fully a member of the church. When we talk about orthodoxy in terms of our belief, we mean the right belief, as opposed to everything else out there that is not the right belief. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a broad question,
I
but
like it.
okay, good.
I like it. I like it.
I think it's one of the things that is challenging sometimes is, especially if you're coming from another Christian denomination, there's often a much more loose understanding of association. I come here, I profess it, so I am, without any official action, and we're very explicit about the requirements to be Orthodox. You must be baptized and chrismated in an Orthodox church in order to be considered Orthodox. If you do not have that happen, you're not. You can be in a choir, you can be a catechumen, you can be a longtime member of the parish, but you're not Orthodox until you've had those things happen. It is the shared belief which is expressed and confirmed in our baptism and chrismation that is what makes us Orthodox.
7:37.
37, all right, a little after. Anything else? All right. Well, I will say what I often say, which is if you do have questions during the week, feel free to reach out. You've got my contact information on the syllabus. I'm at pretty much all the services, so come find me before or after and ask questions there. I also recommend, just for some difference of opinion, so to speak, ask people on Sundays or other services that are well attended if you've got questions that are maybe not super personal that you're interested about. Most people here will either give you a good answer or tell you that they're not comfortable and direct you to me. So, but people are here are pretty happy to talk to you. So, feel free to reach out. But of course, I'm always available or try to be anyway. Worst case, I will see you not next week because we meet at Resurrection. So again, final plug: go to Holy Resurrection or Resurrection Greek Church in Castro Valley for their General Feast. We'll see you the week after that for our next class. Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
I didn't ask any questions online.
No,
I think you probably would have jumped in there. Do we have people join?
John Kennedy was watching, but there's only some people there. Might have been a lot of ins and outs.
Sure.
Although he did say the camera switching was solid, so
Okay.
that's a plus.
That's good.
I think.
I really don't know how much anyone could hear while I was here.
Well, he didn't say anything about the sound being anything, so it's like it's not enough.
That's how we call these mics